In the flickering forge of Myane, where men shaped iron with sweat and prayer, there lived a woman whose hands rivaled the gods. Her name was Callista, a mortal blacksmith with fire in her soul and a hammer that sang when it struck bronze. She built swords that could split spears in midair, and armor so seamless it was whispered that Ares himself once wore her breastplates into battle. The gods noticed, but only one descended. Histus, the lame god of the forge, the outcast of Olympus, watched her in silence. He was not drawn by beauty. Callista was not a woman of perfumes or palace gowns. She wore soot like war paint and smelled of iron and pine smoke. But when she worked, Histus saw something divine in her movements. Something familiar. One night, as the moon hung low and red over the Aegean, Histus entered her workshop, cloaked in smoke and shadow. He offered no gifts, no divine decree, only his presence. The forge flared brighter that night, and 9 months later, a child was born. Arion. He did not cry. Not at first. His eyes opened and glowed like coals, and the fire in the forge leapt as if recognizing its kin. The midwives gasped. One whispered, "He's touched by the divine." Another crossed herself, and the oldest among them muttered, "He's not meant to stay here long." Arion grew faster than other boys. At 5, he could shape iron. At 7, he forged his first blade. Flawless, sharp, and oddly warm to the touch. He never played. He never lied. There was a stillness in him that made others uneasy. The village feared what they did not understand. They called him cursed, the son of a god who had no throne. Children avoided him. Priests refused to bless him. But Callista, she loved him fiercely, teaching him not just to work with fire, but to respect it. "Flame obeys those who listen," she'd say, "not those who command." By the time he turned 16, Orion's forge burned day and night, shaping weapons for cities he'd never seen and kings he'd never meet. But even as metal flowed beneath his hands, something deeper stirred within him. He wasn't made to serve. He was made to change the world. Long ago, the eternal flame had been a gift stolen from the heavens, defied into existence by Prometheus himself. It was fire not just for warmth, but for thought, art, creation. It was what set man apart from beast. But that age of defiance had dimmed. Humanity no longer remembered the debt it owed the gods, and the gods, in turn, had turned their backs on mankind. It began slowly. Hearths that once glowed without fail began to flicker out. Forests grew colder. Storms stretched longer, crops wilted in spring, and homes were filled with the breath of frost, even in high summer. Children shivered beside unlit chimneys. Old women murmured prayers into ashes that gave no heat. Priests spoke of punishment. Scholars blamed the stars. But across villages, towns, and empires, a different fear took root. Not that the world was ending, but that the gods had abandoned them, and they were right. High atop Mount Olympus, the gods had sealed away the last true flame. A spark kept alive only in the divine brazier, untouched by mortal hand for centuries. No god dared share it again. They feared man's rebellion, feared what Prometheus had begun. They told themselves, let them suffer, they must remember their place. But not all gods agreed. In hidden corners of the world, whispers stirred. Dryads spoke of a boy born of flame. Nymphs saw sparks dancing in a boy's eyes from Mycenae. The winds carried a name, Orion. In the cold chambers of Delhi, the oracle dreamed of fire. Walking on 2 legs, lighting cities with its footsteps. And in the depths of forgotten temples, dying candles sputtered back to life at the sound of a blacksmith's hammer striking anvil. Iran had no idea. He only knew the iron was growing harder to shape, that the flames in his forge required more breath, that the warmth that once came easily was slipping away. But the world had begun to watch. Gods, both old and silent, had turned their gaze to mine. The divine brazier atop Olympus, though shielded in marble and guarded by fate, flickered for the first time in an age, responding not to a god, but to a boy born of fire and sorrow. And deep within him, something began to glow. Delhi was dying. Once the center of divine council, where kings and warriors climbed stone paths to seek Apollo's voice, now it stood quiet. Its columns cracked and overgrown, its sacred springs reduced to mist. But one voice still lingered, buried deep within the mountain's breath. The oracle Ian arrived in silence. No one greeted him at the gates. The torches lining the temple had long since gone out. Ivy clung to broken altars like fingers, unwilling to let go of lost faith. Thunder growled in the clouds above, not of rain, but of something older, watching. He descended into the hollow chamber where generations before him had once wept and begged. There, seated atop a crumbling stone throne, was the oracle. She was draped in violet robes, skin pale like ash, eyes blind but blazing with storms. Before he could speak, she inhaled sharply, like a flame being pulled back into a lantern. "Heyun," she hissed, though no name had been spoken. He said nothing. "You will climb the mountain. You will take the flame, and you will die." Her voice cracked like a whip through the stillness. He didn't flinch. He had heard stories of oracles, their riddles wrapped in poetry and metaphor. But this wasn't a prophecy. It was a sentence. She rose slowly, limbs moving like smoke caught in wind. "The gods will oppose you. The world will demand your failure. The flame what you seek. It does not belong to mortals. It was stolen once, and the price was eternity in chains." Irian stepped forward, fists clenched. "So let me pay the price." A long silence followed. Then laughter, not cruel, but tired. The sound of someone who had seen too many stories end the same way. "You already are," she whispered. The room grew dark. The thunder outside crescendoed. Air pulsed with something old, something primal. Then, just as suddenly, everything went still. The oracle slumped back into her seat. Her mouth opened, but only smoke escaped. Her prophecy was done. And though Arian left without another word, her vision followed him. In dreams, in flame, in every shadow cast by his forge, the gods had spoken. His path was set, but not even Olympus could predict what a dying world would do when handed back its fire. Before one could ascend Olympus, one had to earn the mountain's recognition. And Olympus never bowed to the untested. Legends whispered that the base of the mountain was not stone or snow, but soul. That beneath its foundation was a gate sealed by silence and guarded by the oldest fear in creation. Cerberus, the hound of Hades, no one could pass that gate without first touching death. Arian did not question it. He had studied myths the way blacksmiths study heat, closely, wearily. He knew what waited beneath the roots of Olympus. But to reach the eternal flame, he would have to descend, not metaphorically, but into the very underworld itself. So he prepared not with armor, but with craft. He spent 3 days and 3 nights forging a collar, not for battle, but for submission. It was made of obsidian, iron, and the final ember from his mother's forge. Into it he carved 3 names, one for each of Cebero's heads. He whispered them aloud as he worked. Memory, loyalty, grief. On the 4th day, he stood before the shadowed mouth of a cave said to lead downward forever. The wind here was cold, but it did not sting the skin. It scraped the soul, and the air smelled not of rot, but of forgotten prayers. He entered deeper and deeper. He walked past bones that glowed faintly in the dark, past torches that lit themselves without flame until he heard it. The breathing, slow, massive, layered, like 3 storms dreaming in unison, Ceberu's. He stepped into the clearing and found the beast sleeping on a bed of ash and bone, each head twitching in a different rhythm. Its fur was blacker than absence. Its eyes were closed, but its ears twitched. Arian did not draw a weapon. He approached, knelt, and held out the collar. Then, softly, he began to hum. It was the song his mother had sung to him as a child. The one she sang when night made the world feel too big, too cruel. The middle head stirred. The left opened one amber eye. The right snarled, then stopped. They listened, and in that silence, Arian slipped the collar on. Ceberos exhaled, and the door behind him opened, not with rage, but with respect. Irian had touched death, and death had stepped aside. The road up Olympus was no road at all. There were no markers, no stars to guide the way, only sheer rock, biting wind, and whispers that echoed from nowhere. Irian climbed not with certainty, but with instinct. His mortal hands bled. His divine blood burned. The mountain resisted him at every turn. And then he appeared, not with a roar, not in a flash of power, but in silence. Hermes, the trickster, the messenger, the thief. He stood on a ledge ahead, dressed like a traveler, cloak loose, sandals laced with feathers, eyes sharp as broken glass. A crooked grin danced across his lips. "Well," he said, spinning a coin between his fingers, "I thought you'd be taller." Arian didn't stop climbing. "I know why you're here," Hermes continued, walking casually beside him, without ever lifting a foot. "You want to bring fire back to the mortals?" Sweet, noble, stupid. Arian paused, then "Stop me." Hermes chuckled. "Stop you? Oh, no, no. I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to make sure you understand the deal. You're walking into the heart of Olympus, into the god's vault, into a story that isn't yours to tell." And yet, Arian replied, "Here I am." That smile faded slightly. "You're trying to restore a balance that was broken for a reason," Hermes said. "The flame was a gift once, a mistake, and now the gods guard it like a dragon guards gold. Not because it's precious, but because it's dangerous." Arian stared at him. Then they've forgotten what danger looks like. For the first time, Hermes' expression soured. The air around them shifted. The coin in his hand vanished. His wings twitched. "You think you're Prometheus?" he said, voice cold. "But you're not even a flicker compared to him." "I'm not trying to be him," Arian answered. "I'm trying to finish what he started." Hermes stepped forward, pressed 2 fingers to Arian's chest. "Then here's my gift." Pain surged. It wasn't physical. It was deeper. A thread inside him twisted, turned. "The fire you seek," Hermes whispered, "will burn everything you are." Then he vanished. The mountain groaned. Thunder rolled. A storm had begun. Not of rain, but of consequence. And Arian climbed higher, cursed, but unshaken. The curse settled into Arian's chest, like frost in the lungs. At first, it was subtle. A tightening when he breathed, a dull heat beneath his skin. But the higher he climbed, the more it bit into him. Not like a wound, more like erosion. Piece by piece, the man was being scraped away, leaving something raw behind. Mount Olympus was no longer just a mountain. It was alive. Its cliffs shifted beneath his feet. Wind screamed down ravines like ancient voices, furious to be disturbed. The higher he rose, the less mortal the world became. Trees stopped growing. Birds stopped singing. Even the stars above seemed to pull back. There were no paths, only jagged ledges and sheer faces that demanded sacrifice with each step. Arian bled. He slipped. Once he nearly fell to his death, but a sudden flash of heat from within his chest steadied him. It was as if the flame Hermes spoke of, the one that would burn him, had begun to awaken. But he kept climbing because every time he faltered, he thought of the dying hearths. The cold villages, the children huddled in darkness. He thought of his mother, hands blistered, still forging warmth for a world forgetting what warmth meant. And still Olympus offered no mercy. Storm clouds gathered above. Lightning danced along the ridge like gods pacing in frustration. He could feel their eyes now, watching, judging, waiting for him to fall. But it wasn't just the mountain fighting him. It was Olympus itself. He passed ancient ruins carved into the stone. Temples long abandoned by faith, their altars cracked, their gods forgotten. Statues of Athena, with eyes chipped out. Columns of Zeus split by time and silence. Arian realized something no one else had dared to say aloud. The gods weren't powerful anymore. They were afraid. Afraid that a mortal might bring the fire back without their permission. That someone not born in their halls might carry the light that once defined Olympus. And in that fear they threw their worst at him. Ice, thunder, visions, voices. But he climbed. With hands torn and heart smoldering, he rose above the clouds. And in the distance, lit not by sun but by divine flame, he saw it. The brazier, burning, waiting. It was not what he expected. The summit of Olympus wasn't carved in marble or guarded by gods clad in gold. There were no trumpets, no gates, no thunderclaps of divine welcome. There was only silence and the flame. It stood in the center of a windless clearing on a pedestal of blackened stone. The brazier looked ancient, older than language itself, shaped by hands no longer remembered. And inside it danced the eternal flame, not red, not orange, but white, pure, blinding, alive. It did not flicker. It watched. Orion stepped closer. The heat didn't sear him. It entered him as if recognizing something long lost. His breath caught. His skin prickled. That ember Hermes had cursed into his heart now pulsed like a second heartbeat, calling to the flame like a lost sibling. He reached out. In that moment, time faltered. He saw cities built from firelight. He saw his mother's forge blazing in the dead of winter. He saw civilizations rising and falling, each one built around fire, and each one forgetting why it burned. He also saw the punishment. Prometheus chained to stone, his liver eaten daily by a vulture. The gods had called it justice. But Arion saw it for what it was, fear wearing a crown. He could turn back, could let humanity adapt to the cold. Forget fire, forget him. But then he heard the wind whisper her name, Callista, and he remembered who he was. He grabbed the flame, and it took him. Pain screamed through his body, not like burning, like being rewritten. Bones cracked and reformed, his skin glowed, veins pulsing with light. He fell to his knees, roaring soundlessly as the flame poured into every part of him, erasing the boy, forging the fire-bearer. He wasn't holding it anymore. He was it. The brazier flickered, then dimmed, then went cold. Because the eternal flame was no longer chained to Olympus, it had chosen a new vessel. Arion collapsed beside the empty pedestal. Smoke rose from his fingertips, but his eyes glowed like dawn. He breathed barely, but with each breath, a wisp of warmth spread outward into the wind, down the mountain, toward the world below. He had taken the fire, but not for himself, for everyone. Arion did not walk down Olympus. He carried it with him. The moment the flame entered him, the mountain stopped resisting. Winds fell silent. The sky cleared. Even the stone beneath his feet seemed to shift and guide him. Not with reverence, but with recognition. He was no longer a trespasser. It was a torch. His body smoldered with divine heat, not the kind that scorched, but the kind that stirred life. Wherever his foot touched earth, frost melted. With every breath, the cursed wind softened. The air smelled not of smoke, but of renewal, of rebirth. But he was not whole. His limbs trembled beneath the weight of what he carried. The eternal flame was not just fire, it was memory. He could feel every spark it had ever ignited. The first campfire in a prehistoric cave, the torch that lit Athens, the forge that built Troy, and he felt the cost of all of it. He saw the cities burned in its name, the temples razed, the wars fought with stolen fire and ambition. The gift of the gods had never been innocent. But this time he would not give it as a weapon. He descended through cloud and silence, past broken statues of gods who had once been worshipped, now crumbling in divine decay. He passed the cave where Cerberus had once guarded the gate, but the beast was gone. As if even death had stepped aside for what Arion had become, he reached the world below. And there, in a frozen village where hearths had long turned to ash, people gathered around him, not in fear, but in awe. He did not speak. In a world where warmth was a gift, hoarded by gods on a distant mountain, there lived a boy named Arion. He was the son of a blacksmith, raised by the rhythmic clang of a hammer and the dying hiss of embers. While others prayed to the heavens for a flicker of light, Arion looked at his hands, calloused and small, and saw not prayer, but possibility. He remembered the stories, whispers of a time when fire belonged to everyone, before it was stolen and locked away on Olympus. He saw the shivers that racked his mother's body, the pale blue of his neighbor's lips, the way the world seemed to be slowly freezing, not just in body, but in spirit. Hope was becoming a luxury. One day, Arion walked away from his mother's cold forge. He didn't carry a weapon or a torch, simply walked, his destination not a place, but a purpose. He journeyed towards the heart of the cold, to the lands that had forgotten the sun. He walked until his feet were raw, and his breath plumed like a ghost in the frigid air. And then he stopped. In the center of a village square, surrounded by faces etched with despair, he held out his hand. From his fingertips, a single, defiant flame danced into life. It leaped into the nearest hearth, which roared with a warmth no one had felt in a generation. Then another hearth lit, and another. A chorus of fire spread from home to home, city to city, across lands that had forgotten what it felt like to gather around a fire without first begging for it. But this warmth came at a cost. Aryan burned. His hair shimmered like molten gold. His skin cracked and split like cooling obsidian. He was dying, but he wasn't fading. He was becoming something else. He hadn't stolen the flame from the gods. He had become the flame. And as the fire spread, the world began to whisper his name. Not in worship, but in quiet, profound gratitude. There was no grand tomb built for Aryan, no statue carved in his likeness, no solemn songs sung in temples. There was no heroic final battle to mark his passing, no procession, no public mourning, and yet he never truly disappeared. After the fires returned, strange things began to happen. In the most remote villages, where no traveler had passed for months, hearths would suddenly ignite on their own. Entire forests, once frozen solid, blossomed with impossible life overnight. Blacksmiths swore their forges heated faster, their steel glowing brighter than ever before. Children huddled in the biting cold told their parents they saw a man made of light standing beside the fire just before it rose to meet them. No one could prove it, but they all told the same story. Walked until there was nothing left of him to walk with. His body had long since cracked and burned away, not from weakness, but from a total transformation. What remained of Aryan is bone, his blood, his voice had become spark, smoke, and heat, and he gave it all away. His mother's forge was the last place he touched. It had been old, abandoned, its fires cold for decades. Until one night, a lone traveler passing through claimed he saw a boy hammering something that glowed with impossible white heat at the anvil. When the traveler blinked and looked again, the forge was empty, but the flame within it danced high and hot, just like it used to. They say even the gods felt it. That Olympus, sensing its power had been bypassed, trembled in its silence. But the gods did not strike back. They didn't rage or rain down punishment, because even they understood. Aryan hadn't challenged them with war or pride. He had simply reminded them of their forgotten purpose. And so, the eternal flame, once hoarded by immortals, now flickered in every village, every city, every lonely mountain hut. It lived in the warmth of soup shared between strangers, in the soft glow of candles placed by grieving hands, in the defiant torches lifted by rebels seeking light in the darkest of places. And always, they whispered the same name, Aryan. Some say when your fire dims for no reason, it's him passing through, sharing a piece of himself. Others believe that if you listen closely to the crackle and pop of the flames, you can hear the faint, rhythmic sound of a hammer striking an anvil, steady, patient, eternal, because Aryan never died. He became warmth itself. Not a god, not a hero, just a boy who gave up everything to help the world remember how to glow again. In the land of Sparta, where boys were taught to fight before they could speak, and honor was carved into bone, the women were no less fierce. Among them was one whose name echoed through the marble halls like the clash of steel, Leonthe, the daughter of Commander Adrastos. She was born during a blood-red eclipse, as ill omens howled over the city. The midwives who delivered her whispered that a child born under such a sign was touched by forces beyond mortal understanding. They said she came from Aryan himself, a spark of that ancient, selfless fire given form. From her earliest days, Leonthe was different. While other girls learned to weave, she learned to read the stars. While they practiced songs of love, she studied the histories of forgotten wars. Her father, a man forged in the crucible of Spartan discipline, saw not a daughter to be married off, but a weapon to be honed. He trained her with the Agoj boys, pushing her past every limit. She ran the mountains until her lungs burned, wrestled until her muscles tore, and learned the dance of the spear and shield until it was an extension of her own body, the elders protested. A woman in the phalanx? It was an insult to tradition, but Adrastos ignored them. He saw in his daughter's eyes the same unwavering fire he'd only ever seen in the heart of a forge. By 16, Leonthe could outthink, outrun, and outfight nearly any warrior in her father's command. She wasn't just skilled, she was brilliant. She saw patterns in chaos, weaknesses in impenetrable defenses. She was a strategist, a leader, a storm gathering on the horizon. And a storm was coming.
Ace?
From the east, the Persian Empire, a vast and relentless machine of conquest, was turning its gaze toward the rocky shores of Greece. King Xerxes, who called himself a god, would not suffer the defiance of a few small city-states. Sparta, the anvil of the Greek world, was preparing for the hammer's blow. It was in this tense atmosphere that Leonthi's destiny began to unfold. She was more than just a warrior. She was a symbol, a living embodiment of the fire that Arion had given to the world, a fire of defiance, of resilience, of a light that would not be extinguished. And as the shadow of Persia grew longer, the people of Sparta began to look at the girl born of an eclipse and wonder if the whispers were true. They wondered if the spark of a boy who became fire had returned to defend them in their darkest hour. The story of Arion reminds us that the greatest power isn't one we seize, but one we give away. It's the warmth we share, the light we create for others. Its legend lives on, not in stone, but in the flicker of every flame. A constant reminder of sacrifice, hope, and the quiet strength it takes to bring light back into a cold world. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, consider subscribing for more tales of forgotten myths and unsung heroes. Stay warm and keep your own fire burning bright. By age 12, she had bested her brothers in the wrestling ring. By 16, she had led a hunting party into the Tethys Mountains and returned with 3 wild boars tied behind her chariot. Leonthi was not just respected, she was feared. She walked through the Spartan agora with a straight spine and quiet steps. Men lowered their eyes. Women watched her with a strange mix of envy and awe. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and her words were chosen like arrows, never wasted. But there was something in her that few noticed. When she removed her armor at night, when the torches dimmed and the world outside fell away, Leonthi would stare at the stars. Not with a warrior's challenge, but with wonder. There was a softness buried in her, one that battle could not scorch. A yearning not for marriage, not for conquest, but for something else, something the Spartan code had no name for. Peace, magic, mystery, she never said. What she knew was this. Every full moon, when the city slowed and the warriors slept, her body pulled her toward the cliffs above the river Eurytus. She would leave behind her spear, her cuirass, her reputation, and become just a woman wandering beneath the stars alone. The world, she thought, must be bigger than Sparta, bigger than swords and pride. She felt it in her blood, like music she couldn't hear, but knew was playing somewhere. And then one night, beneath a sky so silver it looked scraped from the edge of a blade, she saw it gliding across a still pool in a hidden grove. A swan, unmoving, watching her, moonlight rippling on its back, beautiful in a way no warong had ever been. And from that moment on, Leonthi's life began to shift away from blood and battle towards something softer, stranger, and far more dangerous. The grove was hidden, untouched by the usual grit of Spartan boots. Nestled between 2 cliffs, it whispered of something older than Sparta, older even than Olympus. The trees curved in crescent arches, their branches low and silvered by moonlight. A shallow lake lay at the center, still as glass, and on it the swan. Its feathers shimmered like woven starlight, neither white nor gray, but something in between. It floated with the silence of smoke, cutting across the water with no ripple. Its long neck arched gracefully as if sculpted by divine hands, and its eyes, God's, its eyes, held no animal wildness, no fear, only awareness. Leonthi froze at the tree-ine. Her training screamed caution. Nothing in nature moved like this. No creature stood so boldly before a human, but the swan did not flee. It watched her calmly, expectantly. She stepped forward. It tilted its head. Another step, closer. The lake did not stir. She stood at the edge of the water, heartbeat steady but alert, hand resting lightly on the dagger strapped to her thigh. The swan moved again, slowly, deliberately, toward her. When it reached the edge of the shallows, it stopped and bowed its head slightly. Leonthi knelt. She had seen thousands of things in her life. War camps burning, bloodied warriors screaming at the heavens, newborn calves gasping for their first breath. Never had she seen something so quiet, so still, so enchanted. She reached out. The swan did not resist. Her fingertips brushed its feathers, warm, unnaturally warm, as though its body burned with sunlight instead of blood. A feeling stirred in her chest. Not fear, not fascination, something older. Something she didn't know she'd been missing until that very moment. Connection. The swan blinked once and turned away, gliding back into the center of the lake. Leonth remained kneeling, watching it, unsure what had just begun, but certain it was no accident. The next full moon she returned, so did the swan, and again the next month, and the next. No words, no promises, just presence. A ritual born of silence and gravity. By the time autumn settled on the hills, Leonthi no longer questioned why. She just knew the swan would be waiting, and her world would never be the same. Seasons turned, leaves rained, fell, and grew again. The wars continued far below the hills, but in that moonlit grove, time stood still. Only the full moons mattered now.
Out.
Lay those nights. Leonthi had once measured her worth in battle scars, victories, and commands followed without hesitation. But now, something softer guided her, something far older than Spartan law. Each month, she returned to the grove with offerings, fresh figs, soft linens, carved trinkets from olive wood. The swan never ate, never acknowledged the gifts, yet Leonthi continued, drawn by an instinct she couldn't explain. The swan was always waiting. It met her at the edge of the water, dipped its head gently, then glided by her side. Sometimes it circled her. Sometimes it simply stood beside her on the shore, its warmth bleeding into the air around it like a hidden sun. She began to speak, not like a soldier, but like a woman who had never been heard before. She spoke of her father's coldness, of how victory never filled the empty space in her chest, of the nights she stared at the sky, wondering if there was more than sword and soil. The swan said nothing, but it listened. She could feel it. Its stillness wasn't silence, it was attention. The kind mortals never gave, the kind no commander, no suitor, no friend had ever offered her. Over time, she stopped feeling alone.
Oh.
She braided her hair before each visit, smoothed her robes, sat beside the swan for hours, shoulder-touching wing, saying little, yet feeling more than she'd ever felt in a Spartan palace or battlefield. And still, the swan never fled, never aged, never changed. She should have been afraid. There were stories of gods taking animal form to lure mortals into ruin. She believed in the way her hand fit perfectly along the curve of the swan's neck, in the way it bowed its head when she sang quietly into the night, in the way it seemed to wait for her, need her. No words, no promises. Something ancient took root. And though she didn't speak the word, not even to herself, Leonthi knew what it was. Lev. The swan was not born of earth. Its wings had once stretched across the sky. Its fingers had played the lyre that made the sun rise. Its name had once been whispered in temples, carved in marble, and shouted in song. Apollo, god of light, of music, of prophecy, now silent, feathered, bound. Long before Leonthi was born, Apollo had committed a sin in the eyes of Olympus. He had defied Zeus, not with blade or rebellion, but with truth. He had spoken against his father's punishments, against the cruelty passed down from throne to world, against the silence demanded by power. For this, Zeus did not kill him. He unmade him. A spell cast in fury, more cursed than justice. Apollo was stripped of his form, his voice, his divinity forced into the body of a swan, not to teach him humility, but to remind him he could glow like the sun and still be caged by shadow. The curse was crueler still. There was one condition. If a mortal ever discovered his true identity, the transformation would become permanent. And so Apollo waited years, centuries, lifetimes, floating on lakes, hiding beneath stars, watching mortals forget his temples, forget his hymns, watching the world grow colder as the gods withdrew, until Leonthi, her presence cracked something inside him.
Else.
Something buried so deep even Olympus had forgotten it existed. Hope. He never meant to be seen, never meant to stay. But she returned again and again, and her voice when she spoke to him in the glade, was the only thing that made the fire inside him flicker again. She was not a priestess, not a nymph, not a chosen oracle. She was a warrior with hands that knew only weapons, a woman hardened by loss and trained to feel nothing. And yet she saw him. She treated him not as a symbol or a threat, but as something sacred, something worth waiting for. He dared not speak, dared not reveal his name. But in the tilt of his head, in the stillness of his body, He answered every question she never asked. And slowly, impossibly, he loved her back. In Sparta, solitude was respected, but not for too long. Leonthi's absence did not go unnoticed. Each full moon she slipped away from the barracks, from the training fields, from the watchful eyes of commanders and kin. At first, none questioned her. She was Leonthi, untouchable, unshakable, the warrior whose loyalty was carved into every scar. But Sparta thrived on order, on discipline, and love, especially the hidden kind, was a foreign thing in a city built on control. Whispers began. She wanders. She speaks less in council. She trains, but her strikes lack venom. It was true. Leonthia had changed. Her movements were still sharp, but no longer cruel. Her voice no longer cut, and something in her eyes softened. Some nights she smiled to herself, as if holding a secret the gods themselves couldn't steal. Her father noticed first, Commander Adrastos, a man whose face bore no softness, whose daughters were meant to lead men, not follow feelings. He summoned her one evening under the guise of strategy. Da-da-da-da-da. But when the chamber emptied, he spoke plainly. "What keeps you from sleep?" Leonthi offered no answer. His voice darkened. "Do not forget who you are." But she already had at least the version of herself that Sparta had molded. What the city had built in stone, the swan had touched with water, and Leonthi found herself unwilling to return to who she'd been. Still, Sparta watched. A patrol once followed her out beyond the walls, tracing her steps toward the cliffs. They lost her near the olive groves. She was too skilled to be shadowed, but it was enough to birth suspicion. Priests murmured about omens, that the moonlight carried voices, that the lakes beyond Sparta stirred unnaturally, a warrior woman disappearing each full moon. They feared it was madness, or worse, a god. Leonthi knew the walls were closing in, that eyes were learning to look where before they had looked away, that her silence, once strength, now made her vulnerable. But still she went, still she found him. And in that grove where moonlight touched feather, she forgot the noise of Sparta, forgot the rules, forgot the danger. Only one thing mattered now, not being seen. Because if the world discovered what she knew in her heart, it would destroy them both. The moon was heavy that night, low, swollen, golden as a dying flame. Leonth stood in her chamber, fingers trembling over her armor, unable to fasten the final clasp. Something had changed. She had felt it for days. A quiet trembling beneath her feet, like the ground itself knew what she did not. The swan had been different on their last meeting, restless, more watchful. Its feathers bristled when the wind shifted. It had circled her twice before settling at her side, its warmth sharp instead of soothing. That night, sleep eluded her, and when it came, it brought visions. She stood in a silver grove, her hands covered in gold dust. A statue loomed before her, part man, part swan, its wings frozen mid-beat, its face serene and lifeless. She reached out, called a name she didn't know she knew, Apollo. The statue cracked, and a voice echoed. Not from the sky, but from inside her bones. Truth will freeze what love has kindled. She awoke breathless, heart racing, the name still burning on her tongue. She tried to dismiss it, a dream, nothing more. But warriors know when fear is real. And this was no ordinary omen. This was prophecy. The next day, Leonthi left Sparta earlier than usual, the ache in her chest sharper with every step. She didn't follow her usual path. Her feet led her deeper into the hills, through trees she'd never passed, into groves untouched by memory. There, hidden beneath a curtain of ivy and moss, she found the altar, ancient, cracked, marked with a single unmistakable inscription, carved in old flaking gold. Apollon, her breath hitched. All at once, the pieces fell into place. The warmth of the swan, its listening gaze, the dreams, the curse in her bones. The reason it had always come during the full moon. He wasn't just enchanted. He was a god. Her god, and she had broken something. She stumbled back, the sound of feathers behind her. The swan had followed her, silent as always, but its stillness no longer comforted her. It was watching sadly, softly, as if it already knew, as if the truth had arrived, and so had the end. The grove was no longer still. The air pulsed slow and deep, like the breath of something ancient stirring in its sleep. Moonlight trembled on the surface of the lake. The trees leaned in, silent witnesses to the unraveling of a secret that had survived centuries. Leonthe stood frozen before the altar. The name Apollo still echoed in her mind like a spear striking stone. She turned slowly, as if doing so would unmake the truth.
Oh, yes.
But it was too late. The swan was there, not gliding, not graceful, just standing, watching. Its feathers no longer shimmered, its glow dimmed, flickering like a dying flame. Leonthe stepped toward it, her lips parted, unsure what to say, unsure if anything could be said. "I know," she whispered. The wind stilled. A single feather drifted from the swan's back, falling slowly, silently before vanishing into dust the moment it touched the altar. And then the change began. The swan's neck arched, not in grace, but in agony. Its body trembled. Feathers unraveled into streams of gold and light, wings bent into arms. Webbed feet split into toes that dug into the earth, and where the swan had stood now knelt a man, naked, radiant, broken, Apollo. His hair shimmered like the sky at dawn. His skin glowed faintly like embers beneath marble. But his eyes were dimmed by sorrow, by inevitability. Leonthe stepped back, hand to her mouth. She had loved him in silence, and now silence had become unbearable. He tried to speak, but the curse had not fully lifted. His voice cracked like thunder in a storm too old to name. "You weren't supposed to know," he said at last, voice barely more than wind. In the heart of an ancient grove, where moonlight fell like silver dust, a god and a mortal stood on the edge of eternity. He was Apollo, the sun-kissed, the divine. She was Leonthe, a Spartan warrior, her heart as fierce as her blade. There was a rule, a single, cruel decree from Zeus himself. If Leonthe ever spoke Apollo's true name, he would be lost forever. It was a test of love, a chain forged in jealousy. For a time, they lived in a stolen paradise, a world of whispered secrets and shared dawns. He was her swan, a gentle disguise for his blazing divinity. But in a moment of pure, unguarded love, the name slipped from her lips, a sound as soft as a prayer and as devastating as a death knell. The moment it was spoken, the curse began its final, merciless work. The ground beneath them shuddered, a soundless quake. A divine sentence passed without mercy. Apollo's radiant glow began to fade, his skin, once warm with life, hardening, his limbs stiffening mid-reach. Leonthe fell to her knees beside him, tears cutting down her warrior's face like rivers carving through mountain stone. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, her voice choked with a grief so profound it shook the very air. He smiled then, just once, a god's smile, not of joy, but of farewell. "I know," and with that, Apollo was turning to stone. The light beneath his skin dulled like cooling metal. His golden hair, which had caught the sun's first rays, lost its luster, hardening into threads of marble as the final phase of Zeus's punishment took hold. There would be no forgiveness, no reprieve. Leonthe grasped his hands, still warm, still trembling, but she could feel it, the stone creeping like frost over flesh. His fingers curled around hers one last time before they stopped moving altogether. "No," she pleaded, shaking her head. "No, this can't be how it ends." But the curse didn't listen. It had waited centuries in silence, patient and cruel. Apollo's chest rose one final time and then stilled. His wings half-formed behind his shoulders, as if reaching for the sky one last time, froze mid-fold. His knees, bent in a gesture of shared grief, locked in place. His face, still so beautiful, still so kind, was caught forever between an expression of love and the agony of departure. His eyes remained open, but they were unseeing, staring into an eternity she could not follow. And then, silence. A quiet deeper than any battlefield, deeper than the breathless moments before a charge. This was not the silence of peace, but of loss, of something sacred, shattered beyond repair. Leonthe knelt there, her forehead pressed to his now cold, unyielding hand. A hand that had once cradled stars, now nothing more than stone. Her tears slid down his marble fingers and fell to the earth, one after another, slow and steady, as a funeral march. The grove dimmed. Even the moon, so often bright and watchful, seemed to draw back behind a veil of cloud. No lightning came. No other god appeared. The punishment was done. Zeus had spoken. The swan had flown for the last time. And Apollo, the god of light, music, and prophecy, was now a statue of silence, forever frozen in the moment of his final truth. Leontes stayed long after the transformation was complete, her arms wrapped around what remained of him. She did not scream. She did not curse the heavens. There were no Spartans to hear her cries, no warriors to bear witness to her pain. Only the wind sighing through the trees and the stone figure of a god who had once loved her, not with thunder and fire, but with a quiet, profound stillness. She never returned to Sparta. She left her armor where it lay beside the altar, a gleaming shell of a life she no longer wanted. She let her sword fall, letting her war-bound name, Leonte the Fearless, drift away like smoke over the lake. The woman who had once stood tall among kings now knelt in silence beside a statue that would never move again. The grove became her world. Each full moon she returned, never missing a single one. She brought no offerings, no incense, no prayers, just herself, and a memory that burned brighter than any temple flame. She would sit beside the statue of Apollo, her fingers brushing the cold stone hand she once held in flesh and warmth. Sometimes she spoke to him, her voice a low murmur, telling him of the changing seasons, the flight of birds, the patterns of the stars. Sometimes she hummed a song he'd never heard, a melody born of her sorrow, but somehow it felt like it belonged to both of them. Other times she simply watched the water of the nearby spring and said nothing. The silence between them filled with everything that had been and everything that could never be. The villagers in the valley below began to whisper. They spoke of a woman who haunted the hills, a spectral figure who wandered under moonlight, with eyes that held the sorrow of distant stars. Some said she had gone mad with grief. Others whispered that she had been chosen by the old gods, a guardian of a sacred place. But no one ever dared disturb her. They sensed the power of her vigil, the sanctity of her loss. Years passed. Winters came and went, blanketing the grove in white. Empires rose and fell. Gods who were once worshipped fell silent, their names forgotten. But Leonte remained. She grew older, her hair turning the color of snow, but she never grew frail. Her strength endured, not the strength of a soldier, but the strength of the ancient olive trees, their roots clinging to the same patch of earth, year after year, storm after storm. Her love had not died with Apollo. It had simply changed its form. It was no longer a burning fire, but a deep, unshakable mountain, a constant presence in a world of change. She became a living legend, a testament to a love so powerful it defied even the wrath of the gods, a quiet keeper of a flame that stone could never extinguish. And still the statue stood, Apollo mid-kneel, wings half-formed behind him, gaze fixed on the space where Leonte always sat, a moment frozen in marble, untouched by time. Some travelers claimed the stone was warm to the touch, that if you placed your hand against his chest, you could feel something faint, like a heartbeat from a dream. And then one final full moon Leonte came. She sat beside him longer than usual, laid her head gently on his shoulder, and never moved again. When the villagers came weeks later, they found her there, peaceful, eyes closed, lips curled faintly in a smile. Beside her, Apollo's statue shimmered faintly, as if lit from within. No one touched it. They built no shrine, no temple, but the legend grew. And now, when the moon is full and the wind is still, some say the swan returns to the lake, not to be seen, but to remember. Melanion was not born under a palace roof or amidst temple incense. He came into the world beneath a willow tree during a storm that split the sky in two. His mother, a midwife's daughter, swaddled him in a linen wrap as thunder rolled over the hills. Birds scattered, the rain danced, and the child did not cry. He hummed from the moment he could walk. Music followed him. Streams whispered melodies when he knelt to drink. Leaves trembled in harmony as he passed. He didn't need instruction. Sound belonged to him. By 10, he could mimic any bird call and weave it into song. By 16, he played the lyre with such grace that even hardened warriors paused to listen. He sang of rivers, of lost brothers, of fields before war, songs that filled men's eyes with tears they didn't know they had. People called him a gift, a miracle, a child of divine breath. He never claimed it. Melania traveled from village to village, sharing his music without coin or pride. His voice calmed fevers. His chords softened hardened hearts. He once played for a dying child who, upon hearing his lullaby, smiled and drifted into death as if it were a dream. But not all ears that listened were mortal. One spring evening, as he sat beside a glimmering river and strummed a tune about starlight, the very air around him changed. The wind slowed, the water stilled, even the frogs silenced their song. And then they arrived, the Muses. 9 of them, stepping lightly from behind the veil of the world, cloaked in light. And sound, each carried her own essence. History, tragedy, dance, epic poetry, and more. Their eyes were not kind, not cruel, just knowing. They listened, and then to Melanian's astonishment, they sang back. 9 voices in perfect harmony, older than language. Melanian closed his eyes, and without thought joined them. His voice didn't echo theirs. It evolved them. When the last note fell into silence, even the stars seemed closer. One of the Muses, coldly, eldest and most stern, touched his brow. "You are not ordinary," she said. "You are a vessel." And thus began the legend of Melania, the bard whose voice would shake the heavens. From that night on, Melania was no longer just a gifted mortal. He was touched, marked, whispered about. The Muses had chosen him. In the quiet folds of Mount Hell, where few dared to tread, they invited him into their sacred circle. There, beneath ancient trees and skies unclouded by mortal ambition, Melania learned not through lectures, but through experience. Holy Muse of Epic taught him how to bend a story into sound. Cleo whispered the histories of nations into his ears as he slept. Terpsora danced barefoot through leaves while he played beside her, his fingers learning the rhythm of wind and body. Yot later flute across his palm and said only, "Listen," and he did. He absorbed not just melodies but truths, the kind that lived between words, the kind that mortals rarely noticed but felt. In the hush before a storm, in the ache of longing, in the gasp of a child at first snowfall, the Muses gave him not power but perspective, and they asked for only one thing in return. Sing for them meaning mortals. The lost, the weary, the proud and broken. Those who needed to remember that beauty still existed even in suffering, that song could be both balm and blade. At first, Melanian obeyed. He performed in city forums and quiet fields, played before kings and beggars alike. His songs stitched broken hearts, stirred revolutions, mended fathers to daughters, and enemies to uneasy peace. But as his gift grew, so did something else. Ambition. He began chasing sounds the Muses hadn't taught, notes no god had touched. In the stillest parts of the night, he would write alone, drafting fragments of something beyond language. It's a song that could bend time, still the wind, and bring tears to stone. A final song, told no one, not even the Muses, because some part of him no longer wanted to share the divine. He wanted to surpass it. And the Muses, ever watchful, saw the change not in his fingers, but in his eyes. The way he looked beyond them, as if destiny owed him more than admiration. And in the distance, fate stirred slightly, because no mortal walks beside the divine forever without cost. Melania withdrew from the world. He left behind the applause, the requests, the gifts from kings, and the adoration of cities. He stopped performing in public, stopped teaching students, even stopped speaking to the Muses. Some claimed he had fallen ill, others said he had died, but in truth, he had gone to the shadowed slopes of Mount Helicon, deeper than any mortal had ever gone, where only echoes of the old gods stirred. There, in a cave lined with crystals that sang when touched by light, he began composing the final song. It came to him in pieces, sometimes in sleep, sometimes in thunder, sometimes in silence so deep it frightened him. He didn't write it. He found it like a secret hidden between the folds of reality. The melody refused to stay still. It changed when he breathed, twisted with his heartbeat. It was not a song for performance. It was truth in sound. He heard the birth of stars in its opening note. He felt the deaths of empires in its fall. It was not sad. It was not joyful. It simply was. He labored for months, maybe years. Time bent strangely inside the cave. He ate little, slept only when the music allowed it. He would weep one moment, laugh the next, as though the song played through his soul instead of his hands.
In an age when the gods had grown distant, a strange plague began to fall upon the mortal world. It was not a sickness of the body, but of the soul, a waking sleep. Men and women would simply stop, their eyes open but seeing nothing, their breath shallow, lost to a dreamless void. They called it the silent fade. But in a hidden temple lived Lyros, the son of a mortal oracle, and Hypnos, the god of sleep. He was born with a unique gift, the ability to walk through the dreams of others as if they were his own kingdom. He could feel the emptiness spreading, a void where the vibrant tapestry of mortal dreams once thrived. He soon discovered the horrifying truth. His own uncle, Morpheus, the god of dreams, had grown resentful of humanity. In his bitterness, he began siphoning their dreams away, hoarding them in his shadowy realm and leaving behind only hollow shells. To save humanity, Lyros must journey into the Oneros, the land of dreams, confront the god who shaped it, and release the stolen light of a million sleeping minds before the last dream fades forever.
He strummed wildly, off-key, frantic, nothing. That night, he returned to his bed early, heart pounding, and the song returned, more radiant than ever. He sang along in the dream, tears streaming, fingers dancing through light. It felt real. He could remember it within the dream. But once again, with dawn's first breath gone, Melania began keeping candles lit through the night, scribbling notes in the dark. He begged his mind to retain a phrase, a rhythm, a single image. But no matter what he tried, it vanished again and again and again. He stopped playing, refused to perform. Crowds dwindled, friends left, his home grew dusty and cold, but none of it mattered. He had one obsession now. Remember the song? The muses stood at a distance, watching with sorrow. He was given a gift, said Oderp, and he chose to cage it. Now he is the only one who will hear it, said Polyhymnia. And never remember, whispered Cleo. It was not vengeance, it was balance. Melania would hear the song every night for eternity, but it would live only in dreams. Each sunrise, it would slip through his grasp like water through cracked hands. He would never stop chasing it, never stop hoping. And in time, hope would rot into madness. Because what torments a bard more than forgetting the greatest song he ever knew, and knowing it still sings without him? Melania stopped counting the nights. They bled into each other, an endless loop of ecstasy and loss. Each evening, he slipped into dreams where the final song embraced him like a lover returned from war. And each dawn, he woke alone, screaming, weeping, blank. At first, he tried to outwit the curse. He hired scribes to sleep beside him, begged seers to extract fragments from his mind. He sang to mirrors, hoping his own voice would betray some hidden memory. Nothing worked, and slowly he began to fray. He stopped eating. His robes hung from a body gone hollow. His fingers trembled when he reached for his lyre, the same instrument he once cradled like a child. Strings snapped under his shaking hands. He didn't fix them. He didn't need them anymore. Because in sleep, the music still came. It became his only purpose, the only place he felt whole. Waking became a punishment. He cursed the sun, smashed his windows, sealed himself in a room with no light. But still the song left with the morning. When he emerged, he no longer resembled a bard. He was wild-eyed, gaunt, his once golden voice now roar from nights of desperate humming. He wandered from village to village like a beggar, not for coin, but for memory. Have you heard it? He'd ask strangers. The song with no beginning and no end. Have you heard it in your sleep? People pied him at first, then feared him. Some threw stones, others fled. He began to sing fragments in the streets, random, frantic bursts of melody. They made no sense to others, but to him they were clues, keys, pieces of a shattered mirror he could almost reassemble, but every time it slipped through his fingers. He laughed when he failed, then cried, then laughed again. And every night the song came back, shimmering, whole, just out of reach. The muses watched, not with anger, with mourning. He had once been their finest vessel. Now he was a cracked jar, overflowing only when no one could hear. And in that descent, the song he'd hoarded became the thing that unraveled him. Not with fire, not with wrath, but with silence. Melania no longer lived in the world. His body walked through it. Yes, but his mind was elsewhere, caught between dreams and daylight, past and present. A song only he could hear, and only when it was too late to hold. He wandered barefoot through cities that once hosted him like royalty. Children who once sat at his feet now ran from his shadow. His name once sung in praise became a warning. Hey, don't end up like Melania. He slept where he could, under trees and empty chapels, sometimes in the doorways of inns whose keepers once begged for his presence. He no longer asked for food, only a place to rest, only the dream. The curse never failed. Each night he fell asleep with trembling hope, and the final song returned. Whole, alive, a perfect ghost, and each morning he woke to forgetting. The cruelty wasn't in the silence. It was in the memory of sound. He remembered that he had heard something transcendent, that it had meant everything. But he could no longer remember why. He began speaking to shadows, to trees, to the stars. Sometimes he would sing to strangers and demand they sing back, convinced the melody was hiding in someone else's throat. Once he believed a child had hummed it in passing. He followed the family across 2 villages before collapsing in the dust, begging the boy to sing again. But the sound had been something else, something ordinary. He wept for hours, and still each night the song returned, taunting, embracing, divine. He tried to hum it as he dreamed, tried to wake mid-melody, but the curse was clever. He could not move within the dream, could not record it, write it, carry it, only hear it. And when he awoke, emptiness. Some who saw him said he still hummed in his sleep. That if you placed your ear near his mouth at midnight, you could hear a music unlike any other. But only then, only in darkness. The muses no longer came. The gods stopped watching, and Melania, once the voice of the world, now wandered like an echo of a song the world could no longer remember, and he could no longer forget. Melania had grown thin as twilight. His skin, once kissed by golden light, was now pale and paper-thin. His voice, what remained of it, was hoarse arrow from years of whispers and wandering. He no longer searched for food, shelter, or even the song, simply walked. One evening he reached a cliff overlooking the sea. It was quiet there. No towns, no roads, no curious eyes. Just the wind, the waves, and the stars slowly rising in the deepening blue. He sat, curled against a stone, the sea breeze tangling what remained of his hair. He didn't weep. He didn't sing. He simply closed his eyes. And the dream came again. But this time, something was different. There was no delay, no mist to wade through, no struggle to hear. The final song was there from the beginning, full and clear. But it was not just sound. It was a place, a presence, a world built from music. Melania stood within it, barefoot on chords that bent like grass, stars pulsing above in rhythm. The sky was a symphony. The wind sang in harmony, and he was not just hearing it. He was part of it. His own voice joined the song, and it did not tremble, did not forget. It soared. He saw every note he had lost, every phrase he'd mourned. But now he understood. The song had never left him. It had grown without him. It had become more than his hands could hold. He was not its owner. He was its witness. And in that final dream, there was no sorrow, no shame, no punishment, only release. When the sun rose, Melania did not stir. The wind lifted softly around his body, as if carrying away a final breath. A shepherd passing the cliffs found him later, peaceful, hands resting on his chest, as if cradling an invisible lyre. There was no scroll, no recording. But above him, high in the coastal sky, seabirds flew in strange formations, almost like they danced to something only they could hear. And the sea for a moment sang, not in words, not in melody, but in something older than either, something he had finally become. Melania was buried beneath a lone olive tree near the cliff where he last slept. No priest performed the rites. No crowds gathered. Just the shepherd who found him, and a few villagers who remembered the stories. Faint echoes of the bard who once made the gods pause mid-breath. There was no monument, only silence. But silence has a way of amplifying truth. In the years that followed, strange things were whispered across the land. Travelers claimed that if you passed that cliff under a new moon, You might hear a melody in the wind. Brief, fleeting, heartbreakingly beautiful. Not a full song, just a note, just enough to make you stop. Children began dreaming of music they'd never heard. Musicians would wake in the night with tears on their cheeks and no memory of why. And sometimes when a bard sat alone at dusk with no audience, a sudden chord would form beneath their fingers. Something not theirs, something perfect. They never remembered it by morning. The musers said nothing. They did not curse another bard. They did not reclaim the song because they understood what Melania had become. Not a warning, not a hero, but a vessel turned legend. A soul whose punishment was born not of cruelty but of refusal, and whose redemption came not through sharing but surrender. The final song was never written down. It was never performed in amphitheaters or temples. It does not exist in scroll or scripture. But it lives in the quiet moments between sleep and waking. In the hush before a performer strums their first chord, in the way the sea sounds different when you're grieving, Melanian song became part of the world itself, not to be remembered, but to be felt. A whisper in the bones, a melody without words. And those who feel it even for a moment never forget the silence that follows. They say if you stand alone on the right cliff on the right night with no one watching, and the wind is kind, you might hear a sound that doesn't belong to this world. Just a fragment, just a breath. And maybe if you listen closely enough, you'll finally understand why Millennium never let it go.